Welcome to another edition of Forecast Lab. We're seeing quiet weather across much of the country. However, a major pattern change could be coming later next week. Let's take a look at the surface analysis this Friday afternoon. We've got a weak frontal system extending from Kentucky into the Ozarks, and a cold front all the way down into Texas, with a secondary push of colder air bringing some Canadian air southward. Another storm system off the South California coast. This is pretty far south, and it's expected to mainly affect Baja California. Checking out the regional conditions in the northeastern U.S., we saw continuing cold advection through Ontario, Quebec, and northern New England. However, it returned to warm air advection further south, with that system emerging from the Great Plains. Temperatures today ranged from the 30s in Maine to the 40s in the Great Lakes, with 60s down south in West Virginia and Kentucky. The overnight lows for tonight expected to remain cold in New England, New York, and into the Great Lakes. Lots of 20s and 30s there, but down south, warmer conditions. 50s for overnight lows in Kentucky and Virginia. High temperatures tomorrow, much the same as today, but we will see 70s nosing into southern Virginia. In the southeastern U.S., we saw record warm conditions yesterday. Macon, Georgia tied the record for the day at 81 degrees. Further west, Greenwood, Mississippi tied the record with 80 degrees. With that deep tropical flow and increasing upper-level winds, we do have a marginal risk across central Tennessee and parts of Mississippi and Alabama. We're looking for a low-end risk of supercells, and already we got a couple cells already ongoing, and other cells further to the west around Shreveport. There's a current look at the radar in Louisiana. Disorganized cells from south of Shreveport towards the Lufkin area. No severe advisories on that. And then the other area of slightly higher concern along the Mississippi-Alabama border. These cells are topping out at about 35,000 feet. And currently we're not seeing anything in here that looks severe. The 925 millibar chart up at about 3,000 feet is pretty good for looking at the general picture. We see that deep southwesterly flow across Mississippi, Louisiana, and it is quite moist. Looking at the green contours, we've got 10 grams per kilogram all the way into Tennessee and 12 into Mississippi and Alabama, and that's corresponding to 50s and 60s dew points. And looking at the air mass associated with this activity, we can pull up a proximity sounding near these cells, and we don't see tremendous amounts of instability. Most of it's concentrated below 6,000 feet. This little inversion that's helping to minimize some of the CAPE involved and limiting it to about 1,500 joules per kilogram. And the shear is modest from the 0 through 1 kilometer layer. There certainly is some, and it's sweeping out this area right there, giving us about 100 to 200 SRH. And that's the reason we have that low-end possibility of rotating storms. Overnight lows for tonight, quite sultry from Louisiana into Alabama. Those lows will be in the mid-60s. And for tomorrow, similar to today, we'll see mid-80s through much of Florida, 80s into southern Georgia, where some records may be broken. They're also in an extreme drought. 76 in Atlanta, 68 for Nashville, and a bit cooler across Arkansas with 60s there. In the southern plains, we continued to set records yesterday. In the lower Rio Grande Valley, Brownsville reached 89 yesterday. Houston Hobby Airport, 86, which was also a record. But we're starting to break out a little bit from that heat wave and drought. Widespread rains moved across the state yesterday and overnight and pushed into the Mississippi River Basin. DFW Airport recorded almost 4 inches of rain yesterday. Texarkana saw 4.03, and we still have a few isolated flood warnings in the San Saba River and Dallas County, the Trinity River there, both for minor flooding. Highs today ranging from the 50s in New Mexico, the Panhandles, to the 70s around Dallas, 90s continuing for South Texas. For tonight, still hanging on to sultry conditions along the Gulf Coast. Lows in the mid-60s again. Cooler inland with 50 for Dallas, 43 at Oklahoma City, 30s for the Panhandles and northern New Mexico. In fact, all of New Mexico, all that in the 20s and 30s, 42 for El Paso. And for tomorrow, warming up to the upper 50s in northern Oklahoma, 67 for Dallas, 81 for Houston, 77 for San Antonio, and of course cooler in New Mexico. In the northern plains, we do have that low-pressure area in Kansas, northerly flow to the west of that low, and warm advection out to the east. Highs today ranged from the 30s in northern Minnesota, the Lake Superior region, to the 40s in the Central Plains, into Denver, 60s for the Ozarks. A high wind warning remains in effect for the usual area of Montana around Cut Bank and Shelby that runs through 4 p.m. Saturday, west winds gusting to 65 miles an hour. Those extend into Canada as wind warnings to the suburbs of Calgary. Winds could gust to 65 miles an hour there as well, decreasing this evening. Overnight lows for tonight in the 20s and 30s, just about everywhere in the northern plains, upper 30s to mid-40s in eastern Kansas and in the Ozarks. Then for tomorrow, a warm-up in the central plains, 60s, all the way up to North Platte and Grand Island, 59 for Denver, and upper 50s across the far northwest plains. In the southwestern U.S., another storm system and atmospheric river affecting the deserts. You can see that wraparound right there all the way up to Death Valley. High temperatures mostly in the 50s and 60s. Rains did reach some unusual areas the past few days due to that deep southeasterly flow. Death Valley recorded 0.35 inches on Monday and 0.44 yesterday. Both of those were daily records at that location. A winter storm warning remains in effect for the San Bernardino Mountains above 6,500 feet. Right in this area, up to 3 inches of snow possible. The winter weather advisory for the San Gabriel Mountains and the other coastal mountains have been dropped. Wind advisories continue around Simi Valley, Thousand Oaks, Oxnard, and Tehachapi Pass. Flood watch continues for the deserts of southeastern California, southwestern Arizona. Due to ongoing showers and storms, there could be up to an inch of rain through that area. And in Central California, we have this new dense fog advisory for tonight. We are getting into the season for two-leaf fog, and that's due to strong radiational cooling and those moist lowland areas. That can be a big hazard on Interstate 5 and Highway 99. It's been implicated in numerous pileups. Also, the coasts remain stormy between Point Arguello up to Point Arena due to 16 to 18-foot breaking waves, rip currents, and sneaker waves. Overnight lows for tonight looking to be around the 20s in the Rockies and Great Basin area, 50s for the deserts and Southern California, and 40s in the San Joaquin Valley. Then for tomorrow, a bit warmer for the Arizona deserts, 70s appearing at Phoenix and Tucson, with 50s and 60s just about everywhere else. And looking at the Pacific Northwest, partly to mostly cloudy. We saw highs in the 40s and 50s throughout the entire area. Salt Lake City was expecting 51 with 52 at Portland and Seattle. Dense fog advisories were in effect for the Willamette Valley. Salem and Eugene, those expired at 1 p.m. The Oregon coast from Florence to Astoria under beach hazard statements for sneaker waves. And you may think that nobody would be out on a beach this time of year, but this is the season for razor clams in that part of the country. And those waves can be unexpected and rapidly drag people out to sea. Overnight lows for tonight, 20s and 30s east of the Cascades. For Seattle, 46, 39 for Portland, and 23 at Klamath Falls. For tomorrow, continued cool, much like today. A bit of warming in some places, 40s in the mountains with 50s in the lower valleys, and 58 there at Medford. And now we head west and north. A lot of weather programming you see on TV and even on YouTube, they believe that all the weather stops at the international border. But we go up north and we look at what's going on there because a lot of times our weather does originate from there. Now in Alaska, we see that most of the inclement weather is on the west coast with a strong northerly flow. And in the Alaska Panhandle, we have strong onshore flow with a southwesterly flow driving moisture onto the coast and keeping them under a very rainy weather pattern. We have a winter weather advisory in the southern Kenai Peninsula from Tustamina Lake to Homer. 4 to 10 inches of snow are expected there. And we have a winter storm warning on the Yukon Flats. We're looking for 6 to 12 inches there through the weekend. Nothing for Fairbanks, but they're pretty close to that activity. In Canada, checking out the Arctic regions, temperatures are running a little bit on the warm side. We see 20s and teens all the way up to the western high Arctic. Most of the very cold weather is further north around Resolute and Eureka. In southern Canada, we have freezing rain warnings for northeastern Alberta, northwestern Saskatchewan, north of Prince Albert, north of Vermilion, and extending up to Fort McMurray. The actual amounts of ice have not been defined in the warnings, but we will see conditions improving by this evening. And not much going on in eastern Canada, a weak occlusion moving through Quebec, and that could be moving into the Maritimes for tomorrow. Now let's take a look at the upper level chart, 250 millibars, about 34,000 feet at jet stream level. Now we're going to do something different. We start out with today's chart, and we compare that with December 1st. See a difference there? A bit reminiscent of that procedure when you're getting an eye exam. Which looks better, A or B? And we're kind of doing the same thing here. And you can see that we have this ridge in the Pacific that builds dramatically into Western Canada. Very high amplitude pattern. Northerly flow into the western U.S. and the Rockies, and deep southerly flow through the Midwest. So those are some things to look at when we go through these charts. We start out with a split flow pattern. There's the northern split and the southern branch going across Baja California into Texas. And there's that vortex there in California that will be lifted to the northeast over the weekend, coming into the Central Plains for Monday, and gradually these two streams begin merging. And I do see a southern stream down here. This could be the subtropical jet, but we're going to focus mostly on this one. This is a single unified jet across the U.S. So we're going to have a very progressive pattern, these waves, troughs, and ridges moving west to east. So we'll see conditions changing every 2 to 3 days. And then finally, as we get into the weekend after Thanksgiving, extensive amplification of all of the patterns across North America. And then we get into this very interesting pattern for the first day of December. So we could be seeing some very interesting weather. This does have the potential to bring a lot of cold air southward, but we're not going to really know the details until we get closer to December. The other question is, are we generating much Arctic air? Doesn't look like much at the very beginning. We get into those red shades, magenta, those are pretty typical for this time of year, maybe on the mild side. Even the blues, 20 degrees, that's very warm for this time of year. We continue on into next week, and now we see a little bit of an expansion of those magentas and some of that cyan starting to appear. That's the much colder air. And now I think we're starting to get some generation of true Arctic air across Yukon, the Mackenzie River Basin by Thanksgiving. And this is significant. That's bitterly cold air, minus 15 and minus 20 Fahrenheit, all the way through Devon Island down towards northern Baffin Island. So if that links up with that northerly flow through this area, that could get pulled into the U.S. But we're still pretty far away from all that. This initial shot of minus 20s heads into the Hudson Bay area. And we're seeing continued generation of that cold air within this ridge and starting to see some oranges. That's the very first we've seen of that this season. Let me pull this north a little bit. And you can see up there on Axel Heiberg Island, north of, trying to remember all the islands. But yeah, that orange right there, that is minus 40. That is significant. Now on the flip side, we have southerly flow through this area. That's of Pacific origin. So it kind of looks like this initial push of cold air into the U.S. is a little bit scarce on Arctic air volume. I really want to see some extensive development of Arctic air in this region, especially Yukon, Alaska, northern British Columbia, and we're not quite seeing that. But, we're going to have to wait for the details to work out over the next week because we could be looking at a different picture by then. So we look at the forecast for tonight. Heavy rains pushing into Baja California. And you can see this triple point right there, south of Imperial, maybe by 100 to 150 miles. So this is pretty far south. Some of that rain may graze the deserts, San Diego, Imperial, Yuma. Rainfall amounts over the Baja California mountains could be as high as 3 inches. Meanwhile, quite a bit of unsettled weather and rain through the Ohio River Valley into Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York City. So going through tomorrow, some of this rain will move into Arizona. Phoenix, Tucson could be looking at rain as the seclusion works over. The triple point gradually moves into El Paso and begins its march into the southern plains. For Sunday, there will be a marginal risk of severe weather in central Texas from Abilene to San Angelo into the Edwards Plateau. That'll be due to interaction with this warm front and a sheared environment. This is implied by the thickness lines that puts a jet stream like that. Heavy rains also track into the Four Corners area with snows on the mountains. And a new storm system moves into the Pacific Northwest, extensive showers through Seattle and Portland, and gradually that will move inland. Pretty good push of cold air back there for Monday. See that thermal axis right there? That is very cold air. As we progress into Monday, increasingly windy conditions as this push of cold air works into the high plains. We could see wind gusts up to 40 to 50 miles an hour around Cheyenne, Rapid City, and northeastern Colorado. Some thunderstorm activity possible through the lower Mississippi River Valley, and then replaced by this cold air, very dry and cold air moving into the central U.S. around Tuesday and Wednesday. The bulk of the cold air, however, heading into the Great Lakes area, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. We could also see some snow shower activity across the Corn Belt. We'll evaluate that on our Monday show. Pretty good push of modified cold air moves into the southern plains, into Texas and Louisiana, and another weather system moving on to the Pacific coast for Wednesday. Then we go into Thanksgiving. This is the map for then. Looks cold across the Great Lakes area, cool through the southern plains, the deep south, and brisk through the eastern U.S. And looks like they may be clear of most precipitation activity. The main problem with that appears to be in Maine and Boston, and looks rainy in the Pacific Northwest as well, and probably in the southwestern U.S. a lot of warm weather, as this implies ridging across the southwestern U.S. So that's the outline of that ridging. So that's your Thanksgiving forecast. Yeah, it could be some winter weather problems in Montana and Wyoming, Interstate 90, and so on. And as we go into Friday, another punch of cold air coming southward into the Great Plains. And this is interesting for Saturday and Sunday. This is associated with that deep northerly flow coming out of western Canada. So this is likely to change significantly as far as the forecast. Typically when we see Arctic air on the charts, we do see a lot of flip-flopping past 168 hours. So we'll just have to monitor this and see what's in the cards. But this is what we have so far, and this is definitely a significant chunk of Arctic air. This would be associated with widespread snow showers across the northwestern U.S., gap winds through Washington and Oregon, and gap winds as well through the higher terrain of the Rockies. There's one last look at that thunderstorm activity as it crosses over into Alabama Thankfully, no severe weather being indicated, and that's the case as well for the Louisiana and Far East Texas thunderstorms. So hopefully this will bring some much needed rain. And that will do it for this episode of Forecast Lab. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to those of you who are supporting the program. Hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be back here on Monday for the supporter episode and on Tuesday for the public episode. Take care, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.